So my favourite sport and the main sport I love is rugby. And that's why this channel is all about rugby and talking about rugby and trying to think about rugby in a more analytical way. But the thing that kind of got me into sports analytics was starting to learn to love other sports like American football and football as well. And then learning other bits and pieces from basketball and baseball. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's analytical concepts that I think rugby can learn from other sports. So I think a really good jumping off point for analytics is, especially in rugby when thinking about other sports, is expected points. And this is something that's used in American football, it's used in basketball, and they use expected goals in football. And what expected points are is essentially finding out the expected points from that particular situation. So in American football, if you have 1st and 10 and from the 45-yard line, you know in that situation what the expected points are, what team's likely to score next, how many points they're likely to score, and things like that. You can work that out. And it's the same in basketball. Judging by the location of the shot, you can work out the percentage of it going in, and then you can multiply that probability by whether it's a 2-point shot or a 3-point shot. And this, influences how teams play in the same way that American football shows us that running is very inefficient and actually teams should be passing the ball way more because it increases the expected points gained per play. In basketball, it dictates where you should be shooting. So here is a map of the New York Knicks, which, looks kind of messy, quite all over the place. And actually, the New York Knicks are called the New York Knickerbockers, which always surprises me. But then if we look at the Houston Rockets, the Analytical-led Houston Rockets, you can see that map has very set locations on. It's either really, really close to the net or right on the 3-point line. That's where they shoot because that maximizes their expected points. And I've actually got a video that the Minnesota Timberwolves posted on their Twitter of just a guy in training. But you can see there's numbers on the floor, and these are the expected points. So the red labels are a bad shooting position, and the green labels are a good shooting position. And it's also used in football as well, and probably something that's talked about is, the expected goals. So a shot with an expected goals of, say, 0.31 has a 31% chance of going in. And what we've learned from that is that where you should be shooting is right between the sticks and as close to goal as you can, but also you want to be shooting with your foot and not heading the ball, really. You can score from headers, but heading is much more inefficient than shooting with your feet. And we have to think, right, how does this apply to rugby? Well, obviously in rugby, we can find the expected points from a situation, whether that be a line-out, a scrum, maybe even from rucks, the expected points gained from attacking in certain situations. And I think that could be important in influencing decision-making. So one area I think where expected points could be very, very useful, and the obvious use for it, is seeing in what situations should you kick for 3 points or you should kick to touch and go for the corner. Now, from the limited research I've done I think teams should be kicking for the corner way, 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 way more than they do. Probably pretty much all the time because it might have more expected points than kicking for goal. But if we put that into more data and show teams that's something that can really influence decision making and really influence how teams play the game. So justice for Chris Robshaw, I guess. I guess the other use for expected points as well is probably in player scouting. I think probably its most famous use of looking at expected goals is Analytical Darlings Liverpool, who I'm going to talk about a couple of times in this video. That's how they found Mo Salah, because they realised that he was undervalued in the market and he had great expected goals and expected assist numbers. And that's maybe something we can use in rugby. I think it might be hard for a lot of situations, but maybe for fly halves, it could be quite good for seeing how many expected points added per play, per touch kind of thing. Or I think it's probably primary use will be seeing how many expected points does this guy through penalties won and lost. Especially for props at scrum time or sort of jackalers like sevens, guys who can win the ball? What's the expected points gained from when they win the ball and create penalties and turnovers? Kind of on that note, the next thing I want to talk about is positional value. I don't think we really talk about much about what is actually valuable in rugby and what kind of positions are valuable in rugby. And this is obviously very important at the club game because either clubs have a budget or they work under a salary cap. And how you use those funds efficiently is really, really important. And, thinking about how valuable positions are within that is important in itself. And this is something that I think is primarily focused on a lot in American football, partly because the quarterback is so important and so much should focus on getting the best quarterback you possibly can. But also, I guess, the more numbers and data that have come up, we've realised the unimportance of the running back position, despite the fact it's, there's running backs that have won the most valuable player award, despite it being a position that essentially has no value. And one of the reasons for this, as I touched on in expected points, is running the ball is very, very inefficient. But also, you have to think about supply and demand, is that the supply of running backs is really, really big compared to how many you need. They're very replaceable. And I wrote an article about this last year about wingers. And we kind of think of wingers as these star players, and, some of them are, but they score tries, and that's probably overvalued, just being the try scorer, when probably so much of the work is done inside them. But also, they are actually just kind of quite replaceable. In the article, I had a list of about 35, 36 players who'd started, made a certain amount of carries as starting wingers. And you look at all of them, and there's guys like Johnny May and Ibatoy, who I really like, because he's got sort of elite physical traits down the bottom of the list. And you're like, well, these wingers I'd be quite happy to start on my team. And I think the best example of that is probably a team like Exeter, who have been incredibly successful in England, maybe not in Europe, although I think that shouldn't be used against them, is that they've essentially found their wingers as rejects from other clubs. Maybe they got lucky finding Jack Noel from the academy, but also, they've got Tommy O'Flaherty and Osprey's rejects. They've got James Short, a Saracens reject, and Ollie Woodburn, who was sort of sixth choice at Bath, who's been one of their star players pretty much. You can kind of find wingers everywhere, and not just rejects from other teams. The article focuses on Rory McConaughey, who's a Sevens player, and I'm sure you can find lots of players from Sevens. And Bath also found Semessa Rockaduni in the army. You can find wingers everywhere. But a position where you can't find players, and I think a position that probably is undervalued, particularly when people talk about rugby, maybe is the tight head prop. And I'm not really sure what the disparity is between tight head and loose head, but there seems to be way more good loose head props than there are tight head props. Maybe because guys who are just better with their hands, there's some sort of coach bias that fits more into being a loose head. I don't know. So we get more loose heads who are very good at playing with the ball rather than tight heads. But there doesn't seem to be that same supply of them. And that means that if you find a really, really good tight head, that's important, especially when you need two of them on match days, and more because you need to rotate them. They work very, very hard. It's a very physically demanding position. And then if you have a good one, they're probably playing international rugby as well. It's why I think Bath's most valuable player under 23 might not be Zach Mercer or Sam Underhill or Joe Thokinasinga. It might be Will Stewart, because tight heads do not grow on trees. And I think if we look at the eSportif created the sort of who are the highest paid positions in rugby, and you see tight heads are actually reasonably well paid. There is one league that might be overpaying wingers slightly, but the thing that all three leagues seem to agree on is that fly half probably is the most valuable and important position. And that's probably where I'd stand as well, not knowing too much about it, just thinking about every time they touch the ball, it's quite influential and they touch the ball quite a lot. So it makes sense that they would be the most valuable position. And I think that's something we can learn from American football, is similar to how they treat the quarterback position. Now, quarterbacks proportionally probably are more valuable than fly halves, but the way you should be finding the quarterback is you should be always looking to find a better quarterback, get as good of quarterback as you can. And obviously, if you have an elite guy, maybe you don't need to look so hard. But if you're just average there, you should be looking to improve at that position as much as you can. And this is one of the reasons why I think one of the worst off-season moves that Bath have ever made in the Bruce Craig era, which is kind of a spine-tingling phrase, isn't the Sam Burgess fiasco. It's probably a very overlooked thing, which is letting Adam Hastings go. Now, maybe we didn't know Adam Hastings was going to become as good as he was, and you should always be thinking about process rather than results in these sorts of things. But he was touted as a very, very talented fly half. And maybe at times playing, he did look a bit like a deer in headlights. But when you just had two average, maybe slightly above average aging 10s, who you can definitely improve upon, letting a guy go probably for reasonably cheap just seems like bad process and bad business. And now obviously Adam Hastings has gone on to do quite well for Glasgow and been a starting 10 for Scotland. Although one of the reasons he's been a starting 10 for Scotland is probably the mismanagement of Finn Russell. And I took a very different stance in this in the rugby community, that it was, you have to look after your fly half. He's the most important position, and when you have a world-class fly half, if you're a nation like Scotland, he needs to play and you need to build the team around him. And this is, I think, a very different attitude to what we have in America, is Britain to America. I think we probably blame players a lot more than we blame management here. So if you've watched The Last Dance, and I highly recommend it, even though maybe it is a bit of a Michael Jordan propaganda piece, but Michael Jordan was arguably a horrible bloke, assaulting teammates, bullying teammates and things, but they had to keep him around because he was the most valuable player ever. He was the best player. And there's stories of American sports stars doing far worse things than Finn Russell did. And you just hurt your team completely by mismanaging Finn Russell. And that's the thing. Gregor Townsend is much more replaceable than Finn Russell is, because world-class fly halves do not grow on trees, as you can probably find another coach who will do just about as well as Gregor Townsend. So, yeah, maybe look after your fly half. Now, one of the problems, though, with talking about positional value is that rugby positions are probably a lot messier than American football positions. For instance, I used to play hooker, although now my playing days are kind of over because my body's given up on me a little bit. So I should have a bit of bias towards the hooker position, but I probably do think it might be the least valuable position because, they're probably reasonably replaceable. It's not hard to find many of them, and I don't think their roles have that much impact on the game. But that doesn't mean all hookers aren't valuable. I remember going to a Bath game probably when I was a lot younger, and we were playing Saracens, and they dropped this hooker back into the 15 position. I'm like, why have they got a hooker back there fielding kicks? Turns out it was Schauk Brits, and I think he probably gashed us for about a 50-metre run. And we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So, and there's probably ways you can make wingers valuable as well. I'm quite in favour of maybe getting big guys and using them close to the goal line, because that means you can get more ball winners in the forward pack, which is probably what I'd want. And I think that's probably the things that we don't know what's valuable, and that's what we need to find out. But I think that's probably the things that are valuable, being able to punch it in from short-range situations, making meters, and winning ball, essentially. Are probably the things I'd say broadly are valuable. So one of the things in rugby that might be slightly underexploited is set pieces. And this is something that a couple of smart people realised in football whilst working with FC Midtjylland in Denmark. And they realised that people took set pieces in football very inefficiently, and they could find ways of making it more efficient. So they ended up winning the league, and I think in 2015, where they scored double the amount of set piece goals than any other team. And as a weird quirk of this, everyone kind of copied what they were doing and realised what they were doing. So now the Danish league has way more set piece goals than most other leagues. So it's a kind of fun knock-on effect from that. But one of the people working with FC Midtjylland is a guy called Ted Knudsen, who works at Statsbomb, And now if you're really interested in football, go look at statsbomb stuff, listen to the podcast, read some articles, because they do some really, really smart stuff when it comes to football and using data. But one of the main focuses they have is on set pieces, and that's what they talk about. And one of the things they talk about is using anomalies in set pieces. You shouldn't just look at what the average team does. You should be looking at what the extraordinary teams do. And that's kind of what I think you can do in rugby, because imagine if the average of going to the corner, the expected points might be 3.5. But if you can then up that to 4.5, 5 points, suddenly you have an incredible advantage over teams. And it's an advantage that you might be able to use without necessarily having better players. For instance, I'm going to bring them up again, the analytical darlings of football of Liverpool, they probably don't have the same wage budget and as good of players as Manchester City do. But as you can see from this very terrible Excel table, they manage to score more goals from corners than Manchester City do, and have way better quality of shots from corners than Manchester City do. And that's because they use data and analytics to realise how they can kind of close that gap. And I think that's something you can do in rugby. And I think so often too many teams just use set pieces as a way of breaking into phase play, rather than using set pieces as a genuine opportunity to make a big strike play. Because if you think about it, not only can you manipulate where the defence is on the pitch, they're going to be in very set locations, and it's probably where you have the most influence over a coach, where you have the most control over things, but also the offside lines are further back. Why not use that as an opportunity? At lineouts, they're 10 metres further back. At the scrum, they're 5 metres further back. That gives you a great opportunity to run some sort of strike play, which is why I always get kind of annoyed when a team mauls from an area that's not in any sort of try-scoring location, or when they throw it back off the top to the hooker, and it never works. I hate it when they do that, and they always get tackled into touch. But instead, there's so many things that can mean you find an incredible strike play out wide. And you can do crazy, weird things. Liverpool hired a throwing coach, and that was much derided. Well, why not do stuff that's much derided if it helps your set-piece game? I want to see more 12, 15-man lineouts. Because if you think about it, a 12-man lineout, either they're going to just leave their back line in the backs, and you can just keep mauling, and you'll be able to do what Wales did and maul over for a try. Or if they try and match you up with numbers in the line out and really try and stop that driving maul, if you know that they might be able to stop the driving maul, well, suddenly you can give it to the back line, and they've got 7-style space out there. And this is what I think is kind of a great shame with rugby, is we kind of view set pieces. I focus mainly on lineouts, and I guess scrums, it does make sense to split forwards and backs a bit more. But from lineouts, I think we should view it as a 15-man operation. Why not put backs in the lineout, forwards in the back line? If you can have a lineout of loads of backs and still have a 7-man lineout, suddenly you've got your massive 8 and your massive 6 wondering at their tiny wingers, and that's a mismatch that you can create from the lineout. And, from the scrum, why not have guys, all your whole back line standing behind the scrum, where you can go to the right and to the left, and the defence can't really manage for that because you've got a step on them straight away. It'd be quite interesting to see. And I think there are fun things you could probably do with it that teams don't do, because that's just not the way it's done. And the final thing I want to talk about, which probably seems like quite a small thing, but I think it's interesting and can teach us a few lessons, is for American football, the play-action pass. Now, what a play-action pass is where you roll back, you go off to hand it to the running back, and then you fake doing that, and you go into a pass play. And hopefully I'll show you some very sexy videos of Aaron Rodgers making some big plays doing just this. And the theory behind the play-action pass is what you do is you run the ball, and then you run a play-action, and teams bite in on the running game because you've got such a strong running game that it opens up the passing game. The problem with this theory is it's absolute nonsense and isn't true. You can run play-action pass a lot, and it's still efficient no matter what. And the reason for this isn't because you have to establish the run in that game. It's because the run has been established through these, they're constantly saying you have to establish the run, and through training and instinct of the players on the defense, they're instinctively going to go after the run. It doesn't matter if they're told, yeah, they play action 80% of the time. The way their brains instinctively work is, oh, stop the run, even though stopping the run is less valuable than stopping the pass. So that's something that teams know they can exploit, and there's lots of very heavy play action games that are very, very effective in the NFL at the moment. And I do think this is something we can use in rugby because, if you can get defences to bite in based on their instinct, that's something we can use for great effect in trying to go wide earlier. And it also teaches us a little bit about conventional wisdoms, I think, that conventional wisdoms aren't necessarily true. One of the conventional wisdoms I hear a lot in rugby that I don't really see any sort of basis or evidence for is you've got to earn the right to go wide, which I don't understand. You can go wide straight away, and if there's space there, then exploit it. And, if you do go narrow, it doesn't mean there's more space wide because defences quite often fold around the corner. So I've gone and got my whiteboard out because I bought a whiteboard and I want to use it. Ironically, that would be a terrible use of a player, a very inefficient use of resources where you're like, well, we paid a player a lot of money, so we have to use them. That is the sunk cost fallacy, my friend, and a very bad way of managing the cap, especially when thinking about positional value. But I've bought a whiteboard and I want to use it, even if it's necessarily not the most efficient thing to do. So I am falling foul of the sunk cost fallacy, but oh well. But I want to think about how we can use play action in rugby maybe, and, think about concept of why it can make the defence bite in. So one of my favourite concepts in rugby is a thing called the slider. So you essentially just got three guys, and what happens is the inside guy, he runs a sort of curving run to the outside, and the outside guy runs a sort of run in there. So if we've got defenders lined up against there, you can see that it'd be very, very easy for the outside defender to bite in and take the outside man. Then that just leaves space for here, the guy on the outside, to try and exploit. And that's not, even if you know that they're very rarely going to pass it to this guy here, it's so hard for that guy, if he's running into that hole as well, to not just bite in and try and take him as well. I mean, yeah, you can tell him, trust your inside man. You don't need to go for that guy. But it's a really, really, really hard thing to fight against when you've sort of had 10, 15 years of instincts trying to play it. You'd be like, you see a ball carrier, smash him. Yeah, and so you can make the defence bite in and then go to the outside. And I think that's the way we can use play action. And, you don't always have to go to the inside man to set up going to the outside man. They're still going to bite in on this guy, even if they know he's going to get the ball very rarely. So I think, going out the back from the forwards as well. So, if you pass it to Carl Sinclair, he's very good at sort of passing it behind this sort of outside forward and passing it to the 10. And that, even though sometimes it looks quite slow and cumbersome, it does seem to open up holes in the defence out wide. So if you know it's someone like Carl Sinclair who, yeah, he probably is going to pass it to the 10, the forwards are going to want to smash him and not start drifting wide. And you might be able to find space outside. So yeah, I think that's how we can use that concept, is trying to exploit space out wide, and you don't have to necessarily worry about going narrow to set up going wide. So thanks for watching. I hope the video is not too messy and it's reasonably informative. There's a lot of stuff I talk about in kind of a messy sort of wishy-washy way because how it relates to rugby is, not necessarily the clearest thing, but I think it can, give us something to think about, and maybe sort of things like, oh, that thing that happens in football you can use in rugby or so much. And there's other sports that use analytics, I think, to a degree. Baseball's obviously hugely prevalent. I don't really touch on that too much. And yeah, I think even sports that I know very little about, like Aussie rules, I think they probably use, a little bit of the stats and analytics that you might be able to bring to rugby and things. So there's probably lots of concepts we can learn from other sports as well. Also, sorry about the very, very thick, floppy hair and the moustache. I don't know why I decided to grow a moustache in quarantine. Just funny, I guess. Just annoys people slightly. So that's a good reason to do anything, I think. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like it if you want, subscribe if you want. Just, do what you want to do. It's your life. I hope everyone's doing all right in quarantine or wherever they watch this. Maybe someone's watching it in 5 years down the line and thinks I'm talking absolute gibberish. But yeah, thanks very much and bye.